Muy buenas.
Good afternoon, distinguished delegates. The 16th plenary meeting of the substantive session of the United Nations Conference to negotiate a legally binding instrument to prohibit lethal weapons leading toward their total elimination is called to order. The conference will now continue its consideration of Agenda Item 9, Cluster 3. We had concluded the list of speakers regarding the discussion on Article 3 in the Annex, and we were about to start the discussion on Article 2, 4, and 5. And we have the delegation of South Africa that wanted to make some comments. On all the articles, all three articles that are under this cluster. I wanted to tell you that I'm very happy that many delegates and representatives of civil society have been able to attend the side event. I think there were very important issues discussed from an academic point of view and technical point of view that help us help the delegations reflect on how to deal with a number of topics that really are political aspirations that were raised back in March during our conference. For example, there's a very clearly established aspiration by this conference, so that from the very beginning, this legal instrument should include nuclear states, that there should be access to this instrument without any distinction. So the conference should work and try to see how, in practice, we can resolve a number of technical and legal matters and specialized issues in order to reconcile a number of topics. For example, reconcile this desire to see the nuclear states become members with the topic of the prohibition on the possession of nuclear weapons. However, what the conference will need to consider is what sort of guidelines to establish for the future regarding dismantlement of nuclear arsenals without any gaps or omissions. We have to consider that the instrument that we are examining, it needs to be extremely clear. It needs to provide legal guarantees, and it has to be very clear from a technical point of view. Also, we need to bear in mind how, in the time that we have, how we're going to read very carefully the language of the resolution based on the mandate that we've been given for this conference to elaborate a treaty that establishes the foundation for the complete elimination of nuclear weapons in the future. So, following this introductory comment, I want to give the floor to South Africa first, who will make some comments on all the articles from 2 to 5, including Article 3 on this whole cluster. Also, on the list of speakers, we have Iran. So without further ado, I'd like to give the floor to the Ambassador of South Africa. You have the floor, madam. Followed by Iran and then Egypt. The speaker is not using a live mic.
Thank you, Madam President. I thank you for indulging me. Where we left off before lunch, I had asked a series of questions because we felt that our response to the questions you posed would have to be in the context of taking all the articles that you mentioned together. I thank you for giving us that opportunity following the discussion at lunchtime that took place. And as I indicated in the morning, we take Articles 2, 3, 4, and 5 and the annex as a whole, given their interrelated nature and the interrelated nature of these elements. But before I go into the specifics about this, allow me first to make a few general remarks clarifying our national approach to the instrument we are negotiating. From South Africa's perspective, the proposed treaty is not a proverbial silver bullet. Its main purpose is to encourage progress towards the total elimination of all nuclear weapons by stigmatizing and delegitimizing such weapons on a global scale. As such, the treaty would aim at achieving a world without nuclear weapons. In my delegation's view, such a treaty represents a critical yet partial step in terms of scope, similar to the NPT and the CTBT and the envisaged fissile material treaty. Madam President, historically, we have a unique alignment of forces which might not align as they align at the current moment in time. The time frames within which we're working to conclude this treaty are very limited. We dare not lose the moment and the opportunity that we have. All the more reason then, my delegation feels that it's important that we manage the discussions in a manner that allows us to conclude our work by the 7th of July. So South Africa supports the conclusion of a non-discriminatory international treaty that would comprehensively ban weapons, nuclear weapons. To maintain a world without nuclear weapons will clearly require further measures, including verification modalities to be negotiated at a later stage, hopefully with the involvement of all states. At the same time, my delegation believes that for this treaty to be an effective and credible tool, non-discriminatory provisions are needed that would allow not only those that never produced nuclear weapons and those that had already eliminated theirs to join, but also states that still possess nuclear weapons and are committed to eliminate them within a specified time frame. We recommend that the provision dealing with a state that possess or have possessed nuclear weapons prior to entry into force of the treaty could be addressed by articles dealing with declarations and destructive arrangements, coupled with a verification provision only in relation to the final declaration by such states, namely that such states completed the destruction of their weapons and that all nuclear facilities and materials are now in peaceful use, that is to say, under the IAEA safeguards. In our view, comprehensive verification provisions, particularly in relation to the destruction process, will complicate negotiations and may even require intensive discussions with the IAEA and or other role players. Madam President, what we are suggesting essentially builds on South Africa's experience in relation to the destruction process, where the IAEA's involvement encompassed the verification of South Africa's nuclear activities following the destruction process. Madam President, regarding Article 3 and Annex A, as I said in the morning, our proposal, which I believe is being circulated in the room, is that both are deleted and some of these elements are incorporated under our proposals on Article 2, 3, and 5. As noted earlier, the purpose of the instrument is not to create a parallel safeguards regime to that of the NPT, and in particular, to add new obligations to non-nuclear weapon states parties to the treaty. In our view, any additional safeguards arrangements need to focus on those states that still possess nuclear weapons and conduct unsafeguarded activities. In our view, attempts to elaborate too much on the verification safeguards issue will only serve to complicate matters, as I said earlier. The key objective of these mechanisms should be to ensure that it is non-discriminatory, that there can be no concern about the involvement of the IAEA in any disarmament process, but rather for the IAEA to provide confirmation that all material and facilities in a state party that has completed the destruction of its nuclear weapons are under IAEA safeguards and will remain so. Our proposal is therefore aimed at the end goal of confirming that a state party is not diverting material and facilities towards a weapons program, rather than the destruction process that could be complex and may differ from state to state. The current provisions specified in Article 5 already provide a modality that could be used for elaborating more detailed verification arrangements that may be required to deal with other states that possess nuclear weapons and should be maintained. Let me briefly take you through the specific proposals that I hope, which are in a paper that I hope is now in front of you. And I will also request the Secretariat to upload this on the website. We are also drawing on proposals that others have made, and we hope that others will also find sense in what we're saying. On Article 2 on declarations, it changes completely. We say the first paragraph should read as follows. Each state party shall submit to the Secretary General of the United Nations not later than 30 days after this convention enters into force for it a declaration in which it shall A, declare whether it owns or possesses any nuclear weapons or whether any nuclear weapons are located in any place under its jurisdiction or control. B, declare whether there are any nuclear weapons on its territory that are owned, possessed by another state and located in any place under the jurisdiction or control of another state. C, declare whether it engages in any planning, training, or military preparations for the use of nuclear weapons. D, declare whether all nuclear facilities and materials on its territory or under its control are under IAEA safeguards. And if not, undertake to conclude an agreement with the IAEA as soon as possible, but no later than a specified number of years after the entry into force for that state, to ensure that all its facilities and materials remain under safeguards. 2.2 would refer as follows. The Secretary General of the United Nations shall transmit all such declarations received to the state parties. We propose the deletion, as I said, of Article 3 on safeguards, and that it be replaced with a new article that will be entitled Towards the Elimination of Nuclear Weapons. The first paragraph of this will read as follows. Each state party undertakes to immediately remove from operational status and destroy or ensure the destruction of all nuclear weapons or nuclear explosive devices under its jurisdiction or control as soon as possible, but not later than a specified date after the entry into force of this convention for that state party. Upon the elimination of all nuclear weapons under its jurisdiction or control, such state party shall submit a final declaration confirming that all its nuclear facilities and materials are under IAEA safeguards and shall remain so. It shall also permit the International Atomic Energy Agency to verify the correctness and completeness of its final declaration. 3.2 would be each state party which declared that there are nuclear weapons on its territory that are owned and possessed by another state shall ensure the removal of such weapons as soon as possible, but no later than a specified date after the entry into force of this convention for that state party, and shall submit a declaration to that effect upon the removal of such weapons. 3.3 would be each state party which declared that it engages in any planning, training, or military preparations for the use of nuclear weapons shall make the necessary arrangements to terminate such actions as soon as possible, but no later than a specified date after the entry into force of this convention for the state party, and shall submit a declaration to that effect upon termination of such actions. And the last one would be, 4 would be, Madam President, if a state party believes that it will be unable to destroy or ensure the destruction of all nuclear weapons under its jurisdiction or control, referred to in Article 3.1, within that time period, it may extraordinarily submit a request for a meeting of state parties or a review conference for an extension of the deadline for completing the destruction of their nuclear weapons for a maximum period of up to a certain number of years. Finally, Madam Chair, we propose replacing the original heading of Article 5, which is now Article 4, or adding additional measures. We propose that it reads as additional measures, as opposed to how it currently stands. And finally, the deletion of Annex A. I hope I've been able to convey clearly what we propose. I thank you, Madam Chair.
Le agradezco.
Thanks to the delegation of South Africa for such a comprehensive proposal that has given us food for thought. We have a great deal to review and consider. We would also like to request that if you could please submit this proposal by email so that we can include it and send it in electronic document, as an electronic document. I would also like to remind you of the fact, in fact, I had forgotten to mention this to you before adjourning the morning session, that the first compilation on the preamble is already online. And in fact, there you can find all of the proposals that we have received until 9 a.m. this morning. The other proposals related to Article 1, if you could please send those to us as soon as possible, that would be excellent, so we can circulate that as well. There are two delegations that have requested the floor: Egypt and Iran are on the list. Egypt has the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. My delegation wanted to make some comments about Article 2. With regards to Article 2, my delegation supports from a conceptual perspective the need by each state party to submit to the Secretary General of the UN a declaration that would outline its status in terms of manufacture and possession of nuclear weapons or other nuclear explosive devices. However, we have strong views and disagreement with the attempt of this article to identify a specific date, 5th of December 2001, which states shall declare whether they manufactured or possessed nuclear weapons after this date. We believe that the specification of a particular date will once again open the door for the creation of a specific groupings of states and thereby possibly lead to the creation of yet another treaty with a somewhat discriminatory nature such as the NPT. We believe that we must avoid this in the new draft convention. This is a normative treaty that seeks to create an international norm prohibiting nuclear weapons, irrespective of when states have manufactured or possessed nuclear weapons. The date specified creates unnecessary confusion and ambiguity and goes contrary to the general trajectory of this convention to make it simple and clear. Therefore, we believe the reference to the date should be deleted, and accordingly other references to this in Article 4 should be amended accordingly. In addition, my delegation believes that the Article 2, should be amended to include additional elements to be read as follows. Or actually, the Article 2 would be read as follows. I quote, "Each state party shall submit to the Secretary General of the United Nations, not later than 30 days after this convention enters into force, a declaration in which it shall," and there shall be 3 subsections to this. A, declare whether it has manufactured and possesses nuclear weapons or other nuclear explosive devices, and whether there are any nuclear weapons located in any place under its jurisdiction or control. B, report any nuclear weapons or nuclear explosive devices on its territory that are possessed by another state and located in any place under its jurisdiction or control of another state. Section C, undertakes to conduct the irreversible dismantlement of nuclear weapons or other nuclear explosive devices that it possesses or that are located in any place under its jurisdiction or control within a specified time frame. So a new version of Article 2 that is divided into 3 subsections, and frankly it looks quite similar actually to the proposal submitted to South Africa with very similar elements, which I think could be merged and could serve as a possible basis for an amendment of Article 2. I thank you, Madam President.
I thank Egypt for that statement, and I now give the floor to the delegation of Iran, followed by Argentina.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, my delegation believes that, as it was also stated by South Africa, Articles 2, 3, 4, and 5 are linked to each other, and we should discuss all of them in a package. While this morning we were discussing Article 3, and I had points to raise while you asked the suspension of the meeting. I would like to raise it just now, Madam President. I listened carefully to the points made by different delegations on that article, and it is clear for everybody that there is different views on that, divergence of views on that. I think it's natural because we are talking about it's talking about safeguard and the verification mechanism, which is a very complicated issue, as it was stated by previous delegations. We had said from the beginning that we need to reach an agreement on the common understanding for the scope of this treaty. In our view, this article has gone beyond the mandate of having, pure simple document on the prohibition of nuclear weapons. It has gone to the verification mechanism, which is very complicated. It needs its own legal and technical aspects. And by this kind of wording, if just we are going to repeat one commitments under the NPT, I think it can be simply done in other ways. But as stated by other delegations, we should avoid duplications. We should avoid, confusion, more confusion. We should avoid overlapping, contradiction, and any new burden for non-nuclear weapon states who are members of the NPT have already accepted this kind of verification mechanism. As far as the verification mechanism for nuclear weapons or nuclear disarmaments is concerned, Madam Ambassador, I should say that if you look at, for example, CWC, in the CWC we have a most intrusive verification mechanism, as I know, at least in disarmament era. And still, the deadline for the destruction of chemical weapons was 2007. Now we are in 2017, and still in the organization, the people are negotiating and talking about how the facilities and the weapons should be dismantled by 2 major processor states. And it hasn't been done yet. It is because the matter is very complicated. It has different aspects. And we don't think that such a monitoring system of the IAEA, which has been crafted, if the representative of IAEA was here, I think maybe he or she could clarify to us that whether this mechanism could fly or not, can work to meet the desires that we have under this convention. So this is why we do believe that, as South Africa said, we think that this paragraph should be deleted. And regarding other paragraphs which are interlinked to this, we received just now the proposal of South Africa. We will review it and then come back to you regarding our position on that. I thank you, Madam President.
Muchas gracias.
I thank the delegation of Iran for that statement, and I'll give the floor to the delegation of Argentina, followed by Mexico and New Zealand.
Gracias, señora Presidenta.
Madam President, thank you. We would like to thank South Africa for that presentation, and also the presentation by Egypt, we're going to take some time to analyze both submissions and present our position. What I'm going to discuss now has to do with Article 2, as it is right now. My delegation would like to first and foremost request the elimination of the date, which is in the article. It would create a kind of new category between possessing and non-possessing states in vis-a-vis the current NPT by establishing the way in which general obligations would be implemented in the countries that are part of the treaty. Those are non-nuclear states that never had nuclear weapons, and those countries that had arms but declare having destroyed them, and also countries that have nuclear weapons but are subject to the requirement to eliminate and prohibit them. This is complemented by the articles to verify fulfillment and a partial reference to the current safeguard mechanisms of the IAEA, which we discussed today, and which could be modified in Article 3 for non-nuclear states, and the creation of new verification mechanisms for those who have already destroyed their arsenals. This would be in Article 4, and thus, in the future, the design of a mechanism for verification for those who would like to join the treaty but who have not yet finalized or concluded their destruction efforts. This would be in Article 5. There's a provision in Article 5. This is clear. We should still, however, ask ourselves if the inclusion of the date on the provision in the provision of Article 4 would not be simply contemplating the implementation of the provisions by those countries who have withdrawn from the NPT. And this opens the door to the situation whether or not they have violated the provisions of that treaty. So my delegation, first and foremost, would like to request the elimination of this date. We do not think this would be convenient, and we think that this is discriminatory and random. And furthermore, we'd like to reiterate the new category of nuclear and non-nuclear states, and also we believe that by eliminating this date, and if the provisions of Article 3 are strengthened with a direct reference to the NPT, which we had requested, the condition of those states such as Belarus or Kazakhstan or Ukraine should be sufficient in order to verify the fulfillment of this instrument. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias.
I thank the Argentinian delegation and would now like to give the floor to Mexico. Madam President, thank you. My delegation did not take the floor in the prior segment on Article 3 because we believe that safeguards could be discussed as part of a package, considering as a whole the content of Articles 2 to 5. So, as we expressed in the March session, my delegation favors an instrument that is direct and concise, that would favor a negotiation that would be quick and simple. Along with this, we would like to support an inclusive process, which thus should lead to an inclusive text. So, if this is what we want, every state should have the possibility of joining this instrument, and therefore it is necessary for the text to present the way forward so that we can achieve that goal. Thus, we believe that the instrument should not duplicate current agreements, but rather build upon them. Taking into account the aforementioned points, we agree with the analysis of South Africa in the Articles 2 to 5 should be simplified. They should be discussed as a whole, and they should be clear. Article 2 should omit provisions that establish differentiated frameworks for different states. That is the presentation of declarations. This should be an obligation for every state party, for all states party. The rest of the package could be discussed in another article, as was presented by South Africa. We would like to carefully review all of the elements in the South African proposal. My delegation supports its focus because we believe that this is a good foundation in order to amend Article 2 and furthermore substitute Articles 2 to 5. Thank you very much. I thank Mexico, and I now give the floor to New Zealand.
Thank you very much, Madam President. And it is clear that these articles that we're discussing now lie at the very heart of our framing for a nuclear-free world. It's important that they present a coherent pathway for adherence to the treaty by states possessing nuclear weapons, whilst at the same time they must present a satisfactory level of reassurance that all the provisions of our new treaty are going to be met by all its parties. I provided New Zealand's comments on Article 3 safeguards this morning, so I'd like now to comment on Articles 2, 4 and 5. Firstly, on Article 2. As presently drafted, this provision would require all states parties to submit a declaration to the Secretary-General as to whether they or not they have manufactured, possessed or otherwise acquired nuclear weapons after a certain time point. This is an approach borrowed, most notably, from the Chemical Weapons Convention. However, I think that this is one of those occasions, Madam President, when following a precedent drawn from a different context is not really appropriate to the task before us here. The drafters of the CWC, after all, included amongst them a number of states possessing chemical weapons, and so it was necessary in those circumstances to establish a baseline for purposes of the timetable for destruction of the weapons and against which compliance could in future be measured. But the circumstances of this negotiation are altogether different, given that none of us here possess the weapon system under discussion. All of us here are in fact legally bound under the terms of the NPT not to possess nuclear weapons. Accordingly, for us, there is no need whatsoever to establish a baseline. So for all of those of us here, Article 2 is in effect drafted as an invitation to us to make a declaration that we have acted illegally. I note as a further word of caution that notwithstanding the direct utility of the declaration baseline approach in the CWC context, a significant number of states failed to comply with this obligation in the CWC, even after the expiry of a considerable period of time after the Convention's entry into force. This gives us an additional element of doubt regarding the value of the Article 2 approach. It has been explained to me as the justification for the approach followed in Article 2 that it has been drafted in this way to ensure that there's no distinction, no discrimination in treatment as between any state party to the treaty. And we can certainly accept the logic of this, Madam President, when we are focused on treating similar situations similarly. But we would suggest that there does need to be a difference, as indeed is already recognised according to the processes envisaged in Articles 4 and 5, there does need to be a difference in key aspects of the requirements applicable to any state actually possessing nuclear weapons, who must obviously establish a timetable and process for destruction, as between any state which does not possess nuclear weapons. Neither Article 4 nor 5 apply to states not possessing nuclear weapons, and we would suggest that Article 2 should be treated comparably. Better yet, it could be deleted in its entirety, and the declaration baseline process could be explicitly incorporated as part of the pathway for adherence to the treaty, as presently outlined in Articles 4 and 5. We welcome very much the South African proposal just put now. We note that the Article 2 declaration process is retained still in their proposal, and we look forward to engaging with them as to whether they're prepared to reconsider this and whether we might incorporate the South African language with a modification to reflect our concerns about a declaration required from all states parties. Moving now, Madam President, on to Articles 4 and 5. New Zealand's not fully convinced of the value of providing, as has been done under these articles, for two separate pathways for adherence by nuclear weapon possessors. We welcome the fact that the South African approach would standardise this so that there's only one pathway. But just dealing for the moment with the text before us, there are two pathways. We prefer the one envisaged in Article 5 of a standalone additional protocol to govern the terms and conditions, including verification, for adherence by any or all nuclear weapon possessors. We believe it's likely to offer the most viable route. Clearly, there is a need to incorporate into the text of this treaty rather more detail about the process and procedure for such a route, for putting in place protocols in order to provide clear reassurance to all states about the substantive requirements and the procedures for this pathway. This greater level of detail will also make it clear that the terms of an additional protocol can be used to cover all the conceivable circumstances applicable to adherence by any nuclear possessor or grouping of possessors. Madam President, that was our reaction to the text as presented in Article 5. We're interested in the South African approach just put forward now. We like the fact that it offers the prospect of only one standardised approach. It doesn't, of course, set in train an additional protocol, which to our mind gives us a lot of flexibility to provide appropriate procedures and appropriate verification for the entry into the treaty by any nuclear weapon possessor, but we look forward to engaging with South Africa and exploring the proposals they have usefully just made now. Thank you very much, Madam President.
Muchas gracias.
I thank the delegation of New Zealand for that statement, and I now give the floor to the delegation of Austria, followed by Mozambique and Malaysia.
Thank you, Madam President. Like South Africa, Mexico, and some other delegations that have spoken before us, we think that 2 to 5 is one package, and we see it as one whole. And we should perhaps try to concentrate on the most important issues here, and the devil usually is in the detail, so we shouldn't go too much into the detail. So we think that your draft of Article 2 is very good, but what we are missing is that we also address the situation with regard of countries on which territory nuclear weapons are located, because they are not necessarily under their jurisdiction or control. So we have here a wording that would then, after your paragraph 1, continue addressing this issue. Then we ask ourselves whether we should not perhaps also ask for the quantity of such weapons. It's not a must, but in other contexts that has been usually. We have understood your idea with regard to put the date 5th of December, but we wonder whether we should not the specification of the declaration put only into the context of the date of the declaration. Then your paragraph 2 remains unchanged, and like some other speakers before us, we would then like to have only one article, because we do not see a particular need for two different pathways. So in our version, each state party would undertake to destroy and ensure the destruction of all nuclear weapons and other nuclear devices in a time-bound, transparent, verified, and irreversible manner. If we do not have this already expressed under Article 1. Then we think it would be, in a future paragraph 2, be important that a state party that has produced, manufactured, or otherwise acquired any nuclear weapons or other nuclear explosive devices, or then it comes up again the issue of the territory, which we put here, or which owns or possesses such weapons or devices, or which are located on its territory or in any other place under its jurisdiction or control, and had not destroyed them by the date of becoming a party to the treaty, to undertake to present a time-bound plan for their destruction. So the idea is that such a country would have to present a time-bound plan for the destruction or for their removal. And this plan should then be certainly submitted to the first meeting of states parties or review conference, whatever comes first, following its accession, and would then have to be approved there, and there would be a reporting obligation of such a state party for subsequent meetings of states party or review conference until destruction is completed. Then we have a third paragraph here that has to do with the cooperation with the IAEA, and I do not want to read it out now because I will give it to you then later in the written form. And finally, we think that the Irish proposal was very good on safeguards, and we might just put it here. I mean, if you want to have a different separate paragraph, it's article, it's also a possibility, but in our view, it's part of the whole package, so we might even have it here. Thank you. Sorry, I should still say, perhaps, since we want to concentrate on the main issues, we wouldn't like to see issues of military cooperation brought in with planning and preparations, because it opens a number of issues perhaps for countries that are military alliances, even so they themselves are not preparing any nuclear activities or so, by being together with other countries in an alliance. So I think we would open here a little bit of Pandora's box, and it doesn't really add a lot to the significance of the treaty. Thank you.
Le agradezco.
I thank the
De,
delegation of Austria.
usted estaba planteando.
You were mentioning that you were going to submit a document. If it would be possible to share it, if it's not too long, we'd appreciate you sharing it with the plenary, because we think it would be a lot better in order to move forward, so that all of the delegations can consider it and ask questions if that were necessary. We could take advantage of the time that way. Thank you.
I was mentioning that you referred to a proposal that you were going to send to us, but I think it is better for the purpose of the plenary if it is not too long, if it is not going to take too long to refer to the content. I think it is better for all the delegations to be able to listen to the content, and of course we will receive it at the same time. But if you want to share it at this moment. The delegation of Austria has the floor.
Easiest that we distribute it in written form, because by reading and so on, it's a little bit difficult, and also to see it, I think that's more helpful. So we will distribute it in a couple of minutes. Thank you.
Tiene la palabra la delegación.
The delegation of Malaysia has the floor, followed by Netherlands, Switzerland, the Holy See, Ireland, and Indonesia.
Disculpe, voy a corregir.
I'm sorry, I'm gonna correct myself because sometimes the screen is a bit confusing. After Austria, we'll have Mozambique, Malaysia, and the Netherlands.
Thank you very much, Madam President. I'm taking the floor to welcome the proposal by South Africa, which is an excellent proposal. Of course, the South African model is an important model from which we can draw important lessons for our treaty. But I'm not sure whether we can replicate in all its aspects. So the most important exercise for us is to draw lessons and follow as much as possible the text they have submitted. And my delegation will be ready to cooperate with the South African delegation. Secondly, reading both the initial proposal and the South African proposal on Article 2, there is this deadline of not later than 30 days after. I would like to agree here with the distinguished ambassador of New Zealand. Contrary to the rumors, I agree with her most of the time. So I think that here also there is a presumption that we all have nuclear weapons, which is not true, of course. There are two categories, or there will be two categories, those who have and those who have not nuclear weapons. So we need to make very clear, and probably the deadline should be deleted. Let me just say one more thing regarding the South African proposal. Paragraph 1 of their text, subparagraph C, it asks us to declare whether it engages in any planning, training, or military. The distinguished colleague, Ambassador of Austria, who made a mention about that. In fact, what we have to do here is to cease any activity, not to declare whether it engages in any planning or training. But this is a matter of drafting that we will have to look at a later stage. And the same on the proposal by South Africa again, on their draft Article 3 on safeguards. I think that we will give our proposals. The title, instead of toward the elimination, probably it could be only on the elimination and delete towards. And also on subparagraph 3, it is the same, to declare that it engages in any planning. I think that it would need to state that it should cease, it shall cease any activity in that regard. So these are minor comments, Madam President, regarding the South African proposal, which we warmly welcome, and we are ready to work with the South African delegation in the strengthening of this text. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias a la
Thank you, Mozambique. The next speaker is the delegation of the Netherlands, followed by Switzerland and the Holy See.
Thank you very much, Madam President. I have some points on Article 2, 4, and 5. On Article 2, declarations by states parties will be an important element in the implementation of a prohibition of nuclear weapons. The elements of the declaration as proposed in Article 2 make its scope much narrower than the provisions as currently comprised in Article 1. We would appreciate views from other delegations on this. Why this discrepancy? On Article 4, verification of nuclear disarmament poses us with many challenges, politically as well as technically. Article 4, as proposed, demonstrates these. It provides for verification activities by the IAEA without the necessary specifications, and even at a cursory glance, in our view, the modalities of verification seem insufficient to provide any credible guarantees of disarmament. Article 4 provides a role to the IAEA, despite the fact that it is unclear whether the IAEA is equipped or able to carry it out. And the work being carried out by initiatives like the International Partnership on Nuclear Disarmament Verification, IPNDV, and next year the UNGA Group of Governmental Experts on Nuclear Disarmament Verification is highly relevant in this regard. And not only is the suggested role for the IAEA in disarmament verification disputed, it's also not clear how the proposed verification of nuclear disarmament should actually be executed by the IAEA. Know-how and technology are still lacking, plus IAEA does not have a statutory mandate to move in that direction. Article 4 could refer to international initiatives addressing this subject, along with a call for support and means for further development of verification mechanisms. And to this end, we propose the following new paragraph, quote, states commit to developing an effective and efficient mechanism for the verification of nuclear disarmament and undertake to support all relevant initiatives to that end, and we'll provide it in writing. We would furthermore propose to relate any verification mechanism to the temporal dimension we have proposed earlier for Article 1. On Article 5 is unclear what it seeks to cover by protocols. Does this concern protocols for individual states, for example, nuclear weapon possessors seeking to adhere to the treaty, or does it concern generally applicable protocols? If the latter case were true, it creates a parallel negotiating track to Article 6 of the NPT, which, in our view, damages the authority of that provision and the NPT in general. Moreover, it is unclear what the procedure for adopting such protocols would be, and at the very least, these would have to be similar to formal amendment procedures. We therefore propose removal of this paragraph, which would also help to slim down and simplify the draft text. Thank you very much, Madam President.
esta pantalla le voy a...
This screen, I apologize to the delegations. Either I don't understand it, or it's just doing something that I'm really not familiar with. So I'm going to use the good old-fashioned technique of papers. So Malaysia is going to be next, and then we'll have Switzerland and the Holy See. So Malaysia first. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam President. I will try to be brief. As with other delegations, we had seen Articles 2 to 5 in the original text as articles that needed to be considered together. For Article 2 specifically, we are of the view that having a declaration is indeed necessary and indispensable for treaty and instruments such as this. However, we feel that the date put in there of the 5th December 2001 can be removed. We do not see it as having necessary, though we understand the reasons as to why it's there. Article 3 we had considered this morning. As for Articles 4 and 5, again, we see these in particular as having to be considered together, and I believe that many other delegations have also expressed this. These are very important elements within this treaty, but at the same time, it addresses issues which is very much in a long term. It is a future issue, and procedures on how to address verification are, in our view, need not necessarily be specified, nor need not necessarily be finalized at this point of time, recognizing the complexity of verification. We feel that an approach that could be taken is the approach of having language in there that sets up a framework where protocols can be discussed in the future in terms of how these procedures for verification have come up. And there are some elements within the existing language in 5 that refer to that, but we feel that could be strengthened and could be elaborated further once we put 4 and 5 together. Having said that, Madam President, looking at the Article 2 amendments which had been given out in writing by South Africa, as well as had been read out by Egypt, we hear some similarities. We feel that those are both important and valuable contributions, and we will consider them further. But in terms of simplicity, I think that helps with how we move forward on Article 2. With regard to Article 4 and 5, we will study the South African proposal further. We see the merit in what they have done in that the amendments for each of the subpoints in Article 2 is commensurate with a new paragraph in Article 4 and 5, what they now call Article 3 in the text. So we think that it's necessary to keep things simple, to allow us to do this. This is not the place nor the time to look at verification procedures when in fact such procedures are even amongst the nuclear weapon states, they have not settled themselves or understood fully themselves. What we need to do is to allow there to be such a way that this treaty can live on, it can be dynamic, so that when the time comes for nuclear weapon states to join this treaty, then either protocols can be in place to deal with the specific verification measures. And that's the sort of language that we need to look and to place within this text. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Malaysia. I give the floor now to the delegation of Switzerland.
Thank you, Madam President. Regarding Article 4 and 5, we support the logic that both options, destroy and join, as well as join and destroy, should be available. However, we're not really convinced that the provisions should be as elaborated as they currently are. Indeed, we think that these two pathways can be outlined in more simple terms and in a non-discriminatory approach. There are simply too many unknowns at this stage about disarmament scenarios under the treaty. Having too detailed procedures may, at the end of the day, prove cumbersome, if not counterproductive. More specifically, I would like to address Article 5 now. This article should be limited to the scope of this treaty, merely indicating the pathway or necessary legal arrangement for a state possessing nuclear weapons wishing to become a state party. This is not where nuclear weapons convention should be elaborated, where proposal for further effective multilateral measures will be discussed. This would be and go beyond what this treaty is all about. Such measures should be undertaken in the context of the broader disarmament machinery or for a number of effective measures of the NPT's role. This treaty should not undermine or challenge the role of any of these existing fora or processes, a point we raised several times already. Now, let me turn to the South African proposal. We will, of course, thoroughly study it, and I think there are interesting elements and language in there. Still, at the first view, I don't really understand how or why Article 3 should be eliminated. Indeed, I would like to underline once again that we think that Article 3 is a separate item from Articles 2, 4, and 5. There are two different sets of issues that we need to address separately. The safeguards requirements under which any non-nuclear weapon states party to the Prohibition Treaty should be placed are of a different nature from the verification regime required for a nuclear possessor state that is disarming or has just completed this process. And how essential we assess safeguards. There, I'm afraid I will repeat myself from what I said this morning, but I think it's important to say it again, that safeguards are simply essential for the reliability, credibility, and sustainability of the treaty we are negotiating. And again, we're convinced that it would undermine the NPT by creating a new norm parallel to the NPT, but being void of the guarantees that safeguards can provide. So this can't be in our all interest. Thank you very much, Madam President.
Thank you very much to the delegation of Switzerland. I now give the floor to the Holy See, followed by Ireland, Indonesia, Sweden, and Nigeria.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The Holy See would like to make a general comment regarding Articles 2 to 5, because we consider them as a single cluster, a package. In accordance with the mandate of this conference, in order to achieve a complete elimination of a ban on nuclear weapons leading to their total elimination, Articles 2 to 5 must be as clear as possible, should avoid creating gaps or ambiguities. This conference seeks to try to develop an institutional framework that will provide robust support for respect for the obligations by states pursuant to the convention with a view to eliminating nuclear weapons. On this point, it will be important to establish effective synergies with already existing institutions such as the IAEA, inter alia. And on this point, we think that the IAEA is doing very important work to defend the non-proliferation regime and to support the peaceful use of nuclear energy. However, the agency is heavily burdened in fulfilling its already existing obligations. It's pretty heavily stretched, which is why the Holy See supports the establishment of a new authority which would complement the IAEA in order to implement the prohibition on nuclear weapons. This agency or authority would be in charge of supervising the joining of states to the convention and to verify and monitor conformity with the provisions of the convention and monitor the dismantlement of nuclear stockpiles and to associate nuclear states to this convention. Now, nuclear disarmament is a global is a global issue, and it requires a global authority to implement the provisions that are necessary to further our common goals. Thank you. Thank you very much to the delegation of the Holy See. I now give the floor to the delegation of Ireland.
Thank you, Madam President. And first of all, many thanks to you and to the expert speakers earlier for the very informative presentation. Thank you for arranging that for us. As we all know, the mandate for this new instrument is to prohibit nuclear weapons leading to their total elimination. Therefore, as you've said in your introduction of this first draft, the text does need to address this element. However, as I think you and indeed all of us have acknowledged, the core of this instrument is its clear and unambiguous legal prohibitions. So I think at this point it is worth reminding ourselves of this and of how and why we came to choose to move forward with a prohibition instrument in the first place. In our view, it is not the mandate of this conference, nor is it feasible in the time available, nor is it in fact necessary to negotiate detailed arrangements for the elimination of nuclear weapons now. The leading to rather suggests a signpost in the direction of elimination. In this context, it is important to ensure that the door is left open for those who currently possess these weapons and who in the future may wish to be a party to this convention. And in this regard, I appreciate very much what the Malaysian delegate has said about the need for the convention to be dynamic. So what we should aim for is an inclusive instrument that will serve as an effective measure to accomplish the total elimination of nuclear weapons and other nuclear explosive devices. Therefore, we suggest that the accession formula we agree on should reinforce this intended universal nature of the Convention, while of course safeguarding its object and purpose. The Convention will be open for signature to all states, and one possible option for a way forward could be that a state having expressed the intention to join could submit to the UN Secretary-General a declaration confirming that it has not manufactured, possessed or otherwise acquired nuclear weapons or other nuclear explosive devices after a certain cut-off date to be agreed, whereupon the state could proceed to ratification or accession. Alternatively, states not in a position to submit such a declaration can still express their intention to join the Convention at any time, and a meeting of states parties, either regular or extraordinary, could then establish parameters for the process of negotiating the terms and conditions of that accession. And this could take the form of additional instruments, which we could provide for under Article 11, to address the transparent, verifiable and irreversible elimination of nuclear weapons programs and arsenals. It is tempting, though perhaps less so after the presentation we heard earlier, to try to set out those pathways and to envisage how they might work in greater detail. My delegation does not believe it is necessary. Once we try to begin delineating those terms and the various potential pathways, as has been very carefully attempted with the very best of intentions in the first draft, we can see how we very quickly enter challenging and complex technical issues. Of course, just because something is difficult doesn't mean we should avoid it. The question here is when and where. And for these negotiations, such an attempt to go into great detail could risk taking us off our main course, which is the creation of the prohibition instrument. After all, those states that possess nuclear weapons have decided not to participate in this conference at this time. There is no need for us to try to negotiate our draft text here on their behalf. We cannot see into the future, we can only allow for it. As long as we do nothing here to prevent such states from exceeding in the future, then we will serve our mandate here in the present, and we will be in a position to move swiftly to establish the prohibition, which is our primary goal. We are, of course, very happy to work constructively with all other options which take us towards this primary goal, and we very much appreciate the proposals put forward this afternoon by South Africa, also by Austria, and the proposals from New Zealand, and my delegation will be studying these very carefully. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank the delegation of Ireland and give the floor to Indonesia, followed by Sweden.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Indonesia, in principle, is thinking along the same lines as other countries before us, in that we view that there should be no discrimination in the treatment of parties to this treaty. And therefore, we would like to avoid any provisions that would create categorization of countries. We feel, therefore, that it would be advisable, and we would like to see the elimination of the mentions of specific dates in the articles, in Article 2 and the subsequent Article 4. We have received and read the proposal by South Africa. We are initially interested in it, and we are ready to study it and work together with South Africa in this regard for a reformulation of the clusters. Thank you.
I thank Indonesia. Now I give the floor to Sweden, followed by Nigeria.
Thank you, Madam President. As concerns Article 2, we are of the view that it might be superfluous and that we might not need this article. It really doesn't add much to the obligations or to the safeguard verifications. On Article 3, 4 and 5, we believe that there is quite a strong distinction between them, and this was very clearly expressed by my Swiss colleague. Article 3 deals with what we hear as possible future state parties to the convention will have to take on in form of safeguard and verifications. And here we had strong views, as you might recall. While Article 4 and 5 deals with the possible future mechanisms once the nuclear weapons states decides to join this convention. And here we feel that it is good that you have put in the place marks for these future actions, but we feel that we can be very flexible as to the wording of these two paragraphs, or whether it will be one paragraph. And the reason is what was well expressed by Malaysia. Once the nuclear weapon states decide to join this treaty, there will be ample opportunity for them and for us to amend the provisions if necessary. And we feel we have more important things to do here than to spend a lot of time on the formulation of these two paragraphs. Then I would just like to mention something towards the end of my intervention, and that has to do with the balance between the obligations and the safeguards verifications. It has been said by many here today that we have already taken on a lot of obligations as non-nuclear weapon states in form of safeguards. And that might be true. But when it comes to the obligations, we feel that there has been a lot added to your draft, Madam President, and we are not convinced that this is a good way to proceed. We have heard many additions for new obligations like sub-testing, design, financing, military planning, and many others. So we feel that if you add a lot on the obligations, you must also add a lot on the verification safeguard side. But we would instead suggest a balanced approach, and we would appeal to you, Madam President, and to delegations that we try to strike a proper balance between the obligations and the safeguards verification. Thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Many thanks to Sweden. I will now give the floor to Nigeria, followed by Brazil.
Thank you,
Madam President, let me also say that it's been short but very eventful times since last week. So, and you have demonstrated your indefatigable nature, that you are up to the task. So we thank you. My delegation wishes to make quick remarks, and it's principally about the proposal submitted by South Africa, which we support, not necessarily because we are from the same continent, but even if it were to be, we are guilty. But, Madam President, in the morning, my delegation highlighted the importance of the two main issues of safeguards and verification. And going a cursory look at what we have with us would show that South Africa has managed to bridge some gaps. Of course, it's still the first reading, I would say. But then we could see that what we have here, we can easily work with. And that leaves the other part. Because we see that I think it's Article 1D here, as we have, has addressed one of the issues. But on verification, it's also a new proposal here, Article 3.1, I think, which addresses this in the context of immediate removal and operational status and destruction, as it were. But not limited to this, it has also given a window to how we should go about it, or how they intend to go about it. And of course, even if that has to be deliberated on and debated, it has also stressed the essential element of IAA safeguards, which is good. Now, the dilemma is this. We have a number of documents with us, number of proposals, including the one you submitted in the morning on safeguard, and then which I think the way we have it in your original text is in trouble. But with what you have now presented us with, we know we can all look at the whole gamut of what we have and then work with it. But now, we want to see at what point are we going to start working on what you have given to us vis-a-vis the other proposals we have here, particularly the ones from South Africa, and then the second one, the proposal from Austria. And of course, we also have another from our neighbor, New Zealand. So we would want your guidance, you know, and as the earlier speaker, I think it's Sweden, has said that time is of the essence. Of course, ideas will be flying, but we need to bring them together. We need that cohesion. And then it is on that note we believe we will need to see what we can do to whether abridge them, and as you said last week, to ask the delegates who have submitted these proposals to come together. But I think it will need more than those delegates coming together. It will need so many people coming together, because these are ideas that are wonderful, but as we are all working towards the same goal. And regarding what the delegate of Ireland said, that we are not here to negotiate a treaty on behalf of nuclear weapon states. No, because they had the opportunity to join us. They decided to abstain. So we are here to do a work that we'll all be proud of. But then we should not have that hanging over our necks, that we have to negotiate a treaty on their behalf. But I trust your judgment, Madam President, to lead us. I thank you.
I thank Nigeria for that statement. As I mentioned to you at the beginning, we are conducting a first reading of the first draft. Of course, there are numerous proposals, including those put forth today, are very substantive. We are not only talking about topics that are specific that we should reform in the text, but also ideas to restructure the text with new elements that were not considered before. in the treaty. These are the new content, very new content, and I'm sure the delegations are going to need some time in order to send these new proposals to their respective capitals and receive the relevant instructions so you can study them, etc. Our intention here is to continue so that we can conclude the first reading of the text. Of course, if we can conclude before, we will have more time to negotiate so that we can begin working more specifically on the topics that are the most complex that we have before us. But our proposal continues to be that we should do this first reading of the text, which is normally the way we work methodologically. This is the standard procedure. This is how we approach this issue, and then if we want to, we can go back. And as I mentioned to you at the end of the first reading, I will evaluate and assess where we are and propose a working method with everything that we have on the table looking to the future. I'm sure that in the future there will also be numerous comments on the following articles, but also on the articles from 1 to 5. These are definitely the articles on which there will be many more proposals and much more discussion. I now give the floor to the delegation of Brazil.
Thank you, Madam President. This is indeed a very creative and dynamic process, fast-moving. And I think it fills a range of ideas at the same time. But we'll try to follow you. I have some comments to make with respect to this package of 2 to 5. First, we'd like to support all those who have mentioned that they wish not to have this date of 5 December 2001 mentioned in the treaty. We agree with them and their arguments for it. We also think we should focus on the declarations. I think the declarations are a key element of this treaty because a lot of what comes later will be tied to the declarations, to what has been declared. So I think declarations require precise language. We think South Africa's proposals has merit, especially we like the format. We think it's a good format to work with or to work from. On the other hand, we think also that language on declarations should be coherent with language used in prohibitions under Article 1. It is a bit odd, perhaps, to me to see that members should declare whether they have planning or training and military training, etc., when these activities are not prohibited as such in the previous article. So perhaps we should have same languages applying in declarations and in the prohibitions to the extent possible. Fewer articles in this package is better. As we, along with many other delegations that have expressed this view, we favor a single and more inclusive pathway to membership of the treaty. Along the lines of the one you have indicated in paragraph 5 of the zero draft, which allows states to accede to the treaty, to declare after it enters into force for them if they possess or do not possess nuclear weapons, and to take on a fundamental obligation towards verified, time-bound, and irreversible elimination of all nuclear weapons through additional protocols to the Convention to be agreed in a meeting of state parties or review conference, whichever comes earlier. So these are the elements that we would be very supportive of. Of course, they are not reflected in any of the different text proposals. We're not offering you precise language, but the elements that we would like to support. And irrespective of whether we work on the basis of your Annex 1 or the Annex 1 that is mainstreamed into the body of the text, or Article 2D that has been circulated by South Africa just recently, we would propose that the following language on safeguards would be applied. It draws on text of your own making that you have slightly amended this morning and would go as follows, and I will read it. Declare whether it has accepted safeguards as set forth in Article 3.1 of the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, or safeguards fully compatible therewith, and if it has not, undertake to conclude such an agreement with the IAEA as soon as possible, but not later than X years after the entry into force for that state. So that's one of the language proposals we will be circulating and handing over to the Secretariat. Thank you.
I thank the delegation of Brazil for that statement, and I would now like to give the floor to the delegation of Cuba. Madam President, thank you very much. I have been very carefully following the debate. This is one of the paragraphs in which we can still appreciate the significant differences among the delegations. However, we do not believe that it would be impossible to find a middle ground or a solution. As I understand it, the great majority of delegations would prefer the simplest focus possible, but that would still be effective. I have not heard anybody who has opposed the idea of establishing a system of clarifications, and I think there we have a point of agreement that I think is very important, because for us this would be the pillar of the future system. The fundamental differences lie in the scope and the degree of detail in that declaration, but I have not heard any position for a system of declarations. In Cuba's view, the most effective way to resolve this problem would be by ensuring that that initial declaration of states party would correspond exactly to the obligations that are reflected in Article 1. No more, no less. The obligations contemplated under Article 1. And if a state were to declare that it carries out any activity that is prohibited under Article 1, then the declaration should should include additional details, including, for example, the number of nuclear weapons, where they are located, the operational status of these weapons, and other details that later on would be extremely important, so that we can reach an agreement on a protocol, a specific protocol on that state party. For those states who in that initial declaration respond in the affirmative, that is, that they have carried out or they are carrying out any of the activities that are prohibited under the future treaty or convention, then we would have to include in an article perhaps a procedure that would be very simple, that would allow us to agree with that state a specific protocol that would ensure that this activity end within a certain time frame, an agreed upon time frame that should be defined in that protocol. That conclusion of the prohibited activity should be duly certified by the IAEA. In our delegation's opinion, Madam President, this could be a way to resolve this problem. Of course, here many proposals have been submitted. Many of them we could support. There's great merit in them. Therefore, we are ready to continue assessing the options that are put forth by other delegations. Thank you very much, Madam President.
Muchas gracias.
I thank the delegation of Cuba for that statement. We have no other delegations on the speakers list, so we have reached the end of it. No more delegations have requested the floor, and now we can conclude the discussion of this cluster, Cluster 3, and give the floor to civil society. So I will now proceed to first give the floor to Ms. Masako Wada of Women Idanko.
Idankyo.
Idankyo.
Madam President, thank you for the opportunity to speak. I am a sufferer of the atomic bombing in Nagasaki. When the bomb exploded, I was at home, some 2.9 kilometers from the epicenter. I was at age 22 months old at the time. For the hibakusha who have carried the desire for 72 years since then, for no more hibakusha anywhere on Earth, and for the elimination of all nuclear weapons, the draft convention released on last May 22 is a tremendous hope. It shows compassion on our suffering in the preamble and acknowledges the efforts of hibakusha as part of the evidence for which the convention is to be adopted. We hibakusha are deeply moved by and heartily welcome this profoundly humanitarian draft convention. The agony of the hibakusha continues. It is deep and seems never-ending. As a draft convention recognizes this in its old aspects is the inhumane consequence brought about by a single nuclear weapon. At all efforts to prohibit nuclear weapons should further lead to reach the goal of global zero without losing much time. The nuclear weapon is created by humans, used by the humans, and therefore to be abolished by the humans. I call on everyone, let us ban and eliminate all the nuclear weapons. Thank you very much.
I thank Ms. Masako Wada from Nihon Irankyo. Le doy la palabra.
I'll give the floor to Ms. Nadja Smich from the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. Our goal, ultimately, must be to attract the adherence of all states to this treaty. ICANN considers it essential, therefore, that states possessing nuclear weapons be permitted to accede to the treaty subject to a simple obligation to destroy the stockpiles in a verifiable, time-bound manner. As they work to fulfill this obligation, they would be bound to comply with all other aspects of the treaty, including, most important of all, the prohibition on ever using the nuclear weapons. An acceding nuclear-armed state or group of states would need to submit to a meeting of states parties a plan for destroying its stockpile. That plan would then be discussed, amended, and approved. This approach, we believe, is far preferable to one whereby nuclear-armed states would instead be compelled to disarm outside the treaty. It is consistent with our firm belief that prohibition precedes and acts as a catalyst for elimination, and it avoids any suggestion that the so-called step-by-step approach is the only possible route to abolition. Madam President, the draft envisages the negotiation of a broad range of possible protocols on topics not limited to the stockpile destruction, and it is unclear whether a protocol party must also be a party to the treaty itself. Greater clarity is needed. We consider it crucial that the safeguards requirements meet prevailing international standards and offer no possible justification for a reduction in the safeguard standards that a particular state has already accepted. The treaty should require all its parties to make declarations not only on whether they have possessed nuclear weapons, but also on other pertinent matters, including whether they host nuclear weapons on their soil. Madam President, we believe that substantial changes to the draft are needed in order to establish a clear, robust framework for achieving a nuclear weapon-free world. In this regard, we welcome the concrete proposals put forward by South Africa on the overall package of Articles 2 to 5 and by Ireland on safeguards as a useful starting point. Thank you.
I thank Ms. Smith for her intervention. I give the floor now to Mr. Akira Kawasaki from Peace Boat.
Thank you, Madam President. The issues dealt with under Articles 2 to 5 are essential to make sure that this treaty or convention leads the world to the total elimination of nuclear weapons. We propose that the 3 and 4 articles should be rewritten as a package to provide a simpler and more straightforward framework for stockpile destruction and elimination. There are 3 main challenges. The first is to create a mechanism for accession of nuclear-armed states. The treaty should provide nuclear-armed states a join and destroy pathway on the basis of irreversible, concrete, time-bound, and verifiable plans of actions of stockpile destruction, which must be accepted by state parties. The second is to verify the process of stockpile destruction internationally. Effective cooperation between nuclear-armed states and states without nuclear weapons will be key, to be facilitated by the relevant international organizations. This is an unprecedented challenge for the international community. The treaty should provide the basic principles so that the practical details can be completed in the process after the treaty's adoption. The third is to sustain the absence of nuclear weapons or nuclear weapons programs through strong safeguards. As we envision a world free of nuclear weapons, safeguard standards need to be much stronger than today's standards for both states that had but eliminated nuclear weapons and for states that had never had nuclear weapons without discrimination. The treaty must clearly provide the state parties are not allowed to weaken safeguards standards to which they are already bound elsewhere, including those of the NPT and the CTBT. It should also encourage state parties to work to adopt higher standards in a continuous manner. This should not be understood as an additional burden on states. Rather, it is a requirement to achieve the total elimination of nuclear weapons. It is true that the prohibition would not be credible without proper verification, but it is not wise to weaken the prohibition in the areas for which verification capacity is yet to be developed. We should first provide a comprehensive prohibition and the obligation of elimination in an ambiguous manner so that technical challenges can be tackled and solved in the process to come. For further concrete suggestions, I would request the delegates to refer to Peace Boat's working paper, WP 42. I thank you, Madam President.
I thank Mr. Kawasaki from Peace Boat. I give the floor now to Mr. Setsuko Arai, Madame Setsuko Arai from Peace Depot.
Thank you, Madam President. As a civil society group based in Japan, we regret that the delegation of our own government, which is the government of the only A-bombed nation, is absent from this negotiation conference. Our disappointment towards Japan's absence deepens even more as we highly welcome the Japanese word hibakusha, appearing twice in the preamble of the draft convention. In our view, it would be difficult for Japan to become party to the currently negotiated convention so long as it continues to adopt a security policy relying on nuclear weapons. As I believe is widely recognized at this conference, the concept of nuclear deterrence is incompatible with the spirit of the convention. As citizens of Japan, we aspire that our government move to the right side of history, overcome its reliance on extended nuclear deterrence, and join in the path to prohibit and eliminate nuclear weapons under this convention. It goes without saying that those attempts on the part of Japan, as well as other nuclear allied states, should have positive impacts for nuclear-armed states in joining this convention in accordance with Articles 4 or 5 of the draft. To make this happen, we will strengthen our call that our government undertake to review its security doctrines and policies so as to reduce and eliminate the role of nuclear weapons therein, and further, to accede to this convention. And in doing so, we assume it would be a great help if there were specific provisions directly relevant to nuclear allied states, which we can draw on in our campaigns to raise public awareness and to encourage our government for policy change. From that perspective, we suggest that Article 2 on declarations provide that states parties should declare nuclear weapons do not play any role in their military and security concepts, doctrines, and policies. In the context of Japan, the government's policy to depend on and cooperate with the nuclear programs of the U.S. is clearly stated in its National Defense Program guidelines endorsed by the Cabinet. The latest version includes a sentence which reads, and I quote, "With regard to the threat of nuclear weapons, the extended deterrence provided by the U.S. with nuclear deterrence at its core is indispensable," end of quote. Unless this sentence is deleted from its official policy documents, and unless this policy is replaced with other security frameworks that do not rely on nuclear weapons, for example, a Northeast Asian nuclear weapon-free zone, it is of our view that Japan would not be entitled to join the Prohibition Convention. The Japanese government plans to revise its National Defense Program guidelines, most likely by the end of this year. We hope to make use of that opportunity to urge the government to review and alter its nuclear-reliant policy. It is in this context that we propose the above-mentioned revision in Article 2. In closing, please let me reiterate that explicit calls in the Convention's text for policy changes of nuclear umbrella states may well play a significant role in building strong public opinion within the states concerned, calling for their accession to the Convention. I thank you, Madam President.
I thank Mr. Arai from Peace Depot for her contribution. I give the floor to Dr. Masao Tomonaga from Mayors for Peace.
Distinguished delegates and leaders of civil groups, my name is Masao Tomonaga. It is an honor to address you today as the representative of Nagasaki, a city which was destroyed by the second atomic bomb, also representing Mayor Taue, Vice President of Mayor for Peace. I was 2 years old when the second atomic bomb was dropped on Nagasaki. The terrible heat ray and blast released by the atomic bomb destroyed buildings and engulfed the city with a sea of fire. Approximately 150,000 civilians, including children and elderly, were killed or injured. I too was exposed to the atomic bomb at my home, 2.7 kilometers away from the hypocenter. My house was destroyed by the blast, and I was told by mother that I narrowly escaped unhurt. However, afterwards I became a doctor to treat the survivors and learned firsthand the inhumanity of the atomic bombing through long years of dedication to the research on radiation effect on humans. One Hibakusha said, "Nuclear weapons do not allow humans to die nor live like ordinary humans." Another Hibakusha said to me when she suffered from leukemia at age 76, "Doctor, the bomb continued to live deep in my body for 60 years. They continue to live in fear of after effects during their whole life." The Hibakusha and the citizens of Nagasaki have continued to make efforts towards the abolition of nuclear weapons for 70 years, with a wish that Nagasaki must be the last place to suffer from an atomic bomb. Many citizens are watching with hope that the establishment of a nuclear weapon ban treaty will be realized at this conference. The word Hibakusha is mentioned twice in the preamble of the draft. It specifies that their efforts and appeals have actually led to this treaty. I would like to thank Madam President and everyone involved in the creation of this draft. Nagasaki and Hiroshima are expecting that the treaty is adopted with the approval of many countries by the final day of this conference. If there are still any participating countries who are still hesitant in voting, please step back and think, envision once again the experience of the Hibakusha. Nagasaki must be the last place to suffer from an atomic bomb. For 70 years since Nagasaki in 1945, we had fortunately not seen the third detonation on humans. We believe that this was the result of human wisdom that understand the unacceptable, inhumane consequence of bombing and acquisition of will never to use the bomb anymore. A nuclear weapon ban treaty is essential in order to further strengthen this will of mankind. However, in order for the coming treaty to be truly effective, participation from many more countries, including nuclear weapon states and nuclear weapon-dependent states such as Japan, is seriously required. Nagasaki wishes all participating states will continue to create human intellect through discussion on articles that contain measures to promote participation of such nuclear states while seeking the realization of a world free of nuclear weapons. Thank you for listening.
Le agradezco.
I'd like to thank Dr. Tomonaga from Mayors for Peace for his contribution to this conference. Distinguished delegates, we have one more request for the floor from Iran. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I'm sorry I had to go out of the room, so I missed to express my viewpoints on 225 before your conclusion. If you allow me, I would do. Thank you very much. Madam President, in fact, as I mentioned my viewpoints regarding Article 3, I should say that as we understand from this title of this treaty, very frankly, we do not understand the raison d'etre of having this kind of paragraphs articles in this treaty. Going to the discussion of verification or destruction, in our understanding, should be dealt with under comprehensive convention. We are ready to do that. We are ready to work for months, 24 hours, working on such a comprehensive documents, and hopefully we can finalize that. It is our desire and it is our hope. But at present, we are discussing this document entitled "Ban." We are banning the use of nuclear weapons and possession of nuclear weapons. So, the paragraphs should be, relevant to the topic. We do believe that, having said that, we do not need these articles 225 as it has been drafted in this document. Of course, as I said, we will, because, first of all, regarding declarations, for example, as we understand, declarations are needed when there is a verification mechanism. There should be a verification mechanism whether, for example, these declarations are right or not. We can simply ask those states who have nuclear weapons or who have been engaged in nuclear weapons activities, to abandon their activities and destroy their nuclear weapons and then join this convention. And after that, conclude agreement with the IAEA to, verify their activities. So we do not understand the raison d'etre of these declarations. Anyway, On Article 4 and 5, we have two suggestions to be made in line with the title of the treaty, and in written form we will submit it to the Secretariat. But regarding, as I said, from 2 to 5 articles, as it has been drafted in the document, we do believe that it is not relevant with the title of the document, which is a treaty to ban nuclear weapons. I thank you, Madam Chair.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you to the distinguished delegate of Iran. You have proposed language for Article 4.
Proposal for Article 4.
Yes, Madam President. For Article 4, our suggestion is that it can be read as follows. Each state party undertakes to encourage any state that has manufactured, possessed, or otherwise acquired nuclear weapons or other nuclear explosive devices before the entry into force of this treaty to become party to the treaty. Such a state, before becoming party to this treaty, shall A, eliminate all its nuclear weapons or other nuclear explosive devices, which shall be verified by the International Atomic Energy Agency, and B, conclude and bring into force a comprehensive safeguards agreement as required in connection with the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, INF CIRC/153, and attain a broader conclusion from the International Atomic Energy Agency confirming that all nuclear material in its territory or any other places under its jurisdiction or control remains in peaceful activities. Additionally, if such a state is a nuclear weapon state party under the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, it shall also confirm through a legally binding document annexed to instruments of its accession to this treaty that it will never have the status of a nuclear weapon state. The fulfillment of all such conditions shall be approved by the meeting of state parties before such a state deposits instruments of its ratification, its accession to this treaty. This is, we can provide you in writing form. And on Article 5, no, that is good. That's all. Thank you. Thank you.
Estimadas, estimados delegados,
distinguished colleagues, we've had a very fruitful day. We've had substantive discussions on some of the key issues and very complex issues. Before continuing with our discussion of further articles, I think it would be more productive if we could close the meeting at this point in order to kind of digest all the information that we've had this afternoon. I just want to remind all delegations that you send us the proposals that you have presented here, so that please send them before 6 p.m. so that we can send them out tomorrow morning really early. Also, the proposals regarding Article 1 as well. We will also review what we've achieved so far regarding the preambular, because as I said, we received some new comments this morning on the preambular, so we're going to have to revise it, to update it in order to send you whatever new proposals we have regarding the preamble. So I want to conclude today, but by telling you that tomorrow, on Tuesday, as scheduled in the indicative program, we'll start at 10 with consideration of cluster 4, starting with the Article 6. And the idea would be to conclude reading of articles of cluster 5 as well, so that we'll conclude the first reading of articles 6 to 10. That will be the ideal sort of plan. So that being said, now I would like to adjourn the meeting and take advantage of the extra time to examine all the material we received today. And I want to wish you a pleasant evening. So the meeting is adjourned.
Forces which might not align as they align at the current moment in time. The time frames within which we're working to conclude this treaty are very limited. We dare not lose the moment and the opportunity that we have. All the more reason then, my delegation feels that it's important that we manage the discussions in a manner that allows us to conclude our work by the 7th of July. So South Africa supports the conclusion of an undiscriminatory international treaty that would comprehensively ban weapons, nuclear weapons. to maintain a world without nuclear weapons will clearly require further measures, including verification modalities to be negotiated at a later stage, hopefully with the involvement of all states. At the same time, my delegation believes that for this treaty to be an effective and credible tool, non-discriminatory provisions are needed that would allow not only those that never produced nuclear weapons and those that had already eliminated theirs to join, but also states that still possess nuclear weapons and are committed to eliminate them within a specified time frame. We recommend that the provision dealing with a state that possess or have possessed nuclear weapons prior to entry into force of the treaty could be addressed by articles dealing with declarations and destructive arrangements, coupled with a verification provision only in relation to the final declaration by such states, namely that such states completed the destruction of their weapons and that all nuclear facilities and materials are now in peaceful use, that is to say, under the IAEA safeguards. In our view, comprehensive verification provisions, particularly in relation to the destruction process, will complicate negotiations and may even require intensive discussions with the IAEA and or other role players. Madam President, what we are suggesting essentially builds on South Africa's experience in relation to the destruction process, where the IAEA's involvement encompassed the verification of South Africa's nuclear activities following the destruction process. Madam President, regarding Article 3 and Annex A, as I said in the morning, our proposal, which I believe is being circulated in the room, is that both are deleted and some of these elements are incorporated under our proposals on Article 2, 3, and 5. As noted earlier, the purpose of the instrument is not to create a parallel safeguards regime to that of the NPT, and in particular, to add new obligations to non-nuclear weapon states parties to the treaty. In our view, any additional safeguards arrangements need to focus on those states that still possess nuclear weapons and conduct unsafeguarded activities. In our view, attempts to elaborate too much on the verification safeguards issue will only serve to complicate matters, as I said earlier. The key objective of these mechanisms should be to ensure that it is non-discriminatory, that there can be no concern about the involvement of the IAEA in any disarmament process, but rather for the IAEA to provide confirmation that all material and facilities in a state party that has completed the destruction of its nuclear weapons are under IAEA safeguards and will remain so. Our proposal is therefore aimed at the end goal of confirming that a state party is not diverting material and facilities towards a weapons program, rather than the destruction process that could be complex and may differ from state to state. The current provisions specified in Article 5 already provide a modality that could be used for elaborating more detailed verification arrangements that may be required to deal with other states that possess nuclear weapons and should be maintained. Let me briefly take you through the specific proposals that I hope, which are in a paper that I hope is now in front of you. And I will also request the Secretariat to upload this on the website. We're also drawing on proposals that others have made, and we hope that others will also find sense in what we're saying. On Article 2 on declarations, it changes completely. We say the first paragraph should read as follows: each state party shall submit to the Secretary General of the United Nations not later than 30 days after this convention enters into force for it a declaration in which it shall A, declare whether it owns or possesses any nuclear weapons, or whether any nuclear weapons are located in any place under its jurisdiction or control. B, declare whether there are any nuclear weapons on its territory that are owned, possessed by another state and located in any place under the jurisdiction or control of another state. C, declare whether it engages in any planning, training, or military preparations for the use of nuclear weapons. D, declare whether all nuclear facilities and materials on its territory or under its control are under IAEA safeguards, and if not, undertake to conclude an agreement with the IAEA as soon as possible, but no later than a specified number of years after the entry into force for that state, to ensure that all its facilities and materials remain under safeguards. 2.2 would refer as follows. The Secretary General of the United Nations shall transmit all such declarations received to the state parties. We propose the deletion, as I said, of Article 3 on safeguards, and that it be replaced with a new article that will be entitled Towards the Elimination of Nuclear Weapons. The first paragraph of this will read as follows. Each state party undertakes to immediately remove from operational status and destroy or ensure the destruction of all nuclear weapons or nuclear explosive devices under its jurisdiction or control as soon as possible, but not later than a specified date after the entry into force of this convention for that state party. Upon the elimination of all nuclear weapons under its jurisdiction or control, such state party shall submit a final declaration confirming that all its nuclear facilities and materials are under IAEA safeguards and shall remain so. It shall also permit the International Atomic Energy Agency to verify the correctness and completeness of its final declaration. 3.2 would be each state party which declared that there are nuclear weapons on its territory that are owned and possessed by another state shall ensure the removal of such weapons as soon as possible, but no later than a specified date after the entry into force of this convention for that state party, and shall submit a declaration to that effect upon the removal of such weapons. 3.3 would be each state party which declared that it engages in any planning, training, or military preparations for the use of nuclear weapons shall make the necessary arrangements to terminate such actions as soon as possible, but no later than a specified date after the entry into force of this convention for the state party, and shall submit a declaration to that effect upon termination of such actions. And the last one would be, 4 would be, Madam President, if a state party believes that it will be unable to destroy or ensure the destruction of all nuclear weapons under its jurisdiction or control, referred to in Article 3.1, within that time period, it may extraordinarily submit a request for a meeting of state parties or a review conference for an extension of the deadline for completing the destruction of their nuclear weapons for a maximum period of up to a certain number of years. Finally, Madam Chair, we propose replacing the original heading of Article 5, which now Article 4, or adding additional measures. We propose that it reads as additional measures as opposed to how it currently stands. And finally, the deletion of Annex A. I hope I've been able to convey clearly what we propose. I thank you, Madam Chair.
Thanks to the delegation of South Africa for such a comprehensive proposal that has given us food for thought. We have a great deal to review and consider. We would also like to request that if you could please submit this proposal by email so that we can include it and send it in electronic document, as an electronic document.
Muy buenas.
Good afternoon, distinguished delegates. The 16th plenary meeting of the substantive session of the United Nations Conference to negotiate a legally binding instrument to prohibit legal weapons leading toward their total elimination is called to order. The conference will now continue its consideration of Agenda Item 9, Cluster 3. We had concluded the list of speakers regarding the discussion on Article 3 in the Annex, and we were about to start the discussion on Article 2, 4, and 5. And we have the delegation of South Africa that wanted to make some comments. On all the articles, all three articles that are under this cluster. I wanted to tell you that I'm very happy that many delegates and representatives of civil society have been able to attend the side event. I think there were very important issues discussed from an academic point of view and technical point of view that help us help the delegations reflect on how to deal with a number of topics that really are political aspirations that were raised back in March during our conference. For example, there's a very clearly established aspiration by this conference, so that from the very beginning, this legal instrument should include nuclear states, that there should be access to this instrument without any distinction. So the conference should work and try to see how, in practice, we can resolve a number of technical and legal matters and specialized issues in order to reconcile a number of topics. For example, reconcile this desire to see the nuclear states become members with the topic of the prohibition on the possession of nuclear weapons. However, what the conference will need to consider is what sort of guidelines to establish for the future regarding dismantlement of nuclear arsenals without any gaps or omissions. We have to consider that the instrument that we are examining, it needs to be extremely clear. It needs to provide legal guarantees, and it has to be very clear from a technical point of view. Also, we need to bear in mind how, in the time that we have, how we're going to read very carefully the language of the resolution based on the mandate that we've been given for this conference to elaborate a treaty that establishes the foundation for the complete elimination of nuclear weapons in the future. So, following this introductory comment, I want to give the floor to South Africa first, who will make some comments on all the articles from 2 to 5, including Article 3 on this whole cluster. Also, on the list of speakers, we have Iran. So without further ado, I'd like to give the floor to the Ambassador of South Africa. You have the floor, madam. Followed by Iran and then Egypt. The speaker is not using a live mic.
Thank you, Madam President. I thank you for indulging me. Where we left off before lunch, I had asked a series of questions because we felt that our response to the questions you posed would have to be in the context of taking all the articles that you mentioned together. I thank you for giving us that opportunity following the discussion at lunchtime that took place. And as I indicated in the morning, we take Articles 2, 3, 4, and 5 and the annex as a whole, given their interrelated nature and the interrelated nature of these elements. But before I go into the specifics about this, allow me first to make a few general remarks clarifying our national approach to the instrument we are negotiating. From South Africa's perspective, the proposed treaty is not a proverbial silver bullet. Its main purpose is to encourage progress towards the total elimination of all nuclear weapons by stigmatizing and delegitimizing such weapons on a global scale. As such, the treaty would aim at achieving a world without nuclear weapons. In my delegation's view, such a treaty represents a critical yet partial step in terms of scope, similar to the NPT and the CTBT and the envisaged fissile material treaty. Madam President, historically, we have a unique alignment of